Alright folks, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at a gun and thought, wow, that thing looks like it might explode just sitting there? Well, today, we're diving into exactly that kind of territory. My top 5 sketchiest guns. These are the firearms that toe the line between fascinating and downright terrifying. Now, I didn't come up with this list on my own. This one's a viewer request. Someone dropped a comment asking for my sketchiest firearms, and I thought, hey, what a perfect excuse to talk about the guns in my collection that make me slightly nervous. Some of these are relics from a bygone era, others are just poorly executed designs, but they all have one thing in common. They're unpredictable. Whether it's fragile construction, questionable modifications, or just designs that were never meant to handle modern ammo, these guns have stories that'll either leave you laughing or shaking your head. And for the record, some of them are safe, if you know exactly what you're doing. Others, let's just say they're better suited as conversation pieces. So buckle up because we're kicking off a journey through my sketchiest firearms. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. First up, let's talk about the Steyr 8890, a rifle that's as much a history lesson as it is a cautionary tale. This one is a black powder design chambered in 8x50, which is a smokeless powder cartridge. You see the problem already, right? A rifle built for one type of powder but tasked with handling another. It's like asking a horse and buggy to compete in NASCAR. Now, I did a bit of work on this rifle myself. It's been sitting in the back of my closet for years, and when I pulled it out, the stock was dry, the bluing was fading, and let's just say it needed some TLC. But even after all that, there's no getting around its inherent sketchiness. The flapper lock system on this thing feels like it was designed during someone's lunch break, and the whole gun wasn't really meant to handle the pressure of modern 8x50 loads. If you're careful, loading your rounds to black powder levels or down to something like 30 to 40 Krag specs, this rifle can handle it just fine, but load it with full-power smokeless rounds designed for its successor, the Steyr M95, and you're playing Russian roulette with a rifle. One wrong move, and you're looking at a very bad day. I'll admit, this rifle fascinates me. It's a relic from a time when gun makers were transitioning from black powder to smokeless, and while it's beautiful to look at, it's definitely not something I'd trust on the range without double-checking my loads. It's safe in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing, but in the hands of someone who doesn't? Disaster waiting to happen. So yeah, the Steyr 8890 earns its place on this list. Gorgeous? Absolutely. Sketchy? You bet. Next on the list is a rifle that might be even more precarious than the Steyr. The Vetterli rifle chambered in 6.5 Carcano. Originally a black powder rifle, this one was modified by the Italians during wartime as a sort of just-in-case firearm. It's like the rifle equivalent of a Plan B, functional but not ideal. Here's the thing. The Vetterli system was designed for black powder pressures, and while the Italians did their best to retrofit it for 6.5 Carcano, it was never really up to the task. One major issue is the locking lug system. Unlike modern designs, the locking lugs on the Vetterli are a separate piece from the bolt, making them significantly weaker. This wasn't a problem with black powder loads, but with smokeless powder, that's where things get sketchy. Then there's the barrel sleeve. To accommodate the smaller 6.5mm bullet, the original barrels were modified with a sleeve. There's some debate about whether these sleeves were soldered in or just stepped into place. Either way, the risk of failure isn't zero, especially after decades of use and abuse. I've never personally had an issue with the sleeve, but I've heard enough horror stories to keep me cautious. To shoot this rifle safely, you'd need to undercharge your 6.5 Carcano rounds by about 50%. At that point, you're bordering on squib load territory, and even then, you're relying on a rifle that was never really designed for this setup. It's a gamble every time you pull the trigger. I'll admit, there's a certain charm to this gun. It's a testament to wartime ingenuity, taking what you have and making it work. But it's also a reminder that making it work doesn't always mean making it safe. For me, the Vetterli is a collector's piece, not a range toy. It's fascinating, it's historical, and it's absolutely one of the sketchiest firearms in my collection. Alright, let's talk about the legend itself. Old Sketchy, my 1916 pattern Oviedo Mauser. This rifle has been a mainstay on my channel for years, and while its reputation is more about appearances than actual danger, it's earned its place on this list. The gun's base configuration is 7mm Mauser, but I also have a 7.62 NATO barreled receiver that I swap in occasionally. Here's where things get sketchy. The 7.62 NATO versions of these rifles were tested to handle pressures of up to 92,000 psi, which sounds impressive, until you push it too far. Back in the day, I ran over 1,000 full-power 308 Winchester rounds through one of these, and let me tell you, it did not end well. The headspace started walking, and eventually the pressure cracked the receiver. Lesson learned: stick with 7.62 NATO, which has lower pressure than 308. But what really gives Old Sketchy its charm and its name is the way it looks and feels. First off, the bolt has so much play that it's practically a rattle. Show it to someone unfamiliar, and they'll swear it's going to fall apart. Then there's the crack in the stock, which I intentionally repaired just poorly enough to make it look worse. I love watching people's faces when they see it for the first time. They're like, "There's no way I'm shooting that." Here's the twist though. Old Sketchy is actually pretty solid when treated right. Once the bolt locks up with a cartridge in place, it tightens up, and the gun shoots just fine. But that doesn't stop me from having a little fun with its reputation. This rifle is a conversation piece, a prank, and a perfectly functional firearm all rolled into one. So while Old Sketchy might not be as inherently dangerous as some other guns on this list, it embodies the spirit of sketchy. It looks rough, feels rough, and freaks people out, all while delivering a solid performance when it matters. Next up, we're diving into the world of Saturday night specials, the infamous budget handguns that practically define the term cheap and sketchy. These were mass-produced pocket pistols made from Zamac alloy, a material that's about as durable as a soda can when pushed too far. Now, to be fair, the lower pressure versions like 25 ACP, 32 ACP, and 22 long rifle are generally fine. But when you start looking at models chambered in higher pressure calibers like 380 ACP or 9mm, things get dicey fast. Case in point, I've seen slides literally break off the front of these guns and come flying back at the shooter's face. That's not just sketchy, it's downright dangerous. This particular Saturday night special is a 380 Brico, but the same issues plague other brands like Jennings and Lawson. They all share the same fundamental design flaws. The cheap alloy construction can't handle much wear and tear, and over time, parts start to deform. On higher pressure models, the front of the slide is especially prone to failure, turning the gun into a potential face-smashing hazard. I'll admit I'm hesitant to shoot this one. I've put a magazine or two through it for video footage, but that's about as far as I'm willing to go. For the lower pressure calibers, I'm a little more forgiving. I've got a 25 ACP model that I don't mind taking out to the range once in a while, but anything bigger? Hard pass. For me, these guns are more of a curiosity than anything else. They're a piece of firearms history, and they showcase the lengths manufacturers went to in order to make firearms accessible, sometimes at the cost of safety. If you own one, shoot it sparingly, if at all. Trust me, your teeth will thank you. Rounding out the list, we have an absolute Frankenstein of a firearm, the Kyber Pass Handmade Enfield. This is a gun that truly embodies the word sketchy. It's a handmade, single-shot bolt-action rifle that's supposedly based on the Lee Enfield No. 1 Mark III. But calling it a replica would be generous. It's more like an artistic interpretation. First off, this thing is clearly made with whatever materials were on hand. The bolt and extractor look like they were machined in someone's garage after a night out. The rifling inside the barrel is so uneven that it seems the maker knew barrels needed rifling but had no clue how to do it properly. To make things worse, the barrel might as well have been made from rebar. It's thick and crude, and I have no idea how strong it actually is. The front sight isn't dovetailed like it should be. Instead, it's just carved from the same piece of metal as the barrel, which makes me question how much thought went into this build. And then there's the rear sight, which looks like something from the black powder era, with range markings that are wildly optimistic for something this poorly made. What takes the cake, though, is the receiver rail. It's unevenly filed by hand. Honestly, I'm shocked the bolt even moves as smoothly as it does. And let's not forget the trigger, if you can even call it that. It works, but the pull feels like dragging a cinder block across gravel. As much as I appreciate the effort and creativity that went into making this rifle, there's no way I'd ever shoot it, not even with a string from a safe distance. It's an incredible piece of craftsmanship, but it's more of a conversation starter than a functional firearm. That said, I can't help but admire the ingenuity behind it. It's not safe, but it sure is interesting. And there you have it. From questionable conversions like the Viturli in 6.5 Carcano to handmade oddities like the Kyber Pass Enfield, each of these firearms tells a unique story about history, ingenuity, and sometimes sheer recklessness. Owning guns like these is a constant reminder of just how far firearm technology and safety standards have come. Whether it's the fragile construction of a Saturday night special or the unintended risks of an 8x50 Steyr, these are firearms that demand respect and a fair bit of caution. They're fascinating to own and discuss, but most of them are better suited for display than for the range. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you have a gun in your collection that makes you nervous? Or did I miss a firearm that you think deserves a spot on this list? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing your stories, and who knows, your suggestion might end up in a future video. Before you go, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. If you enjoyed this look at the weird and sketchy side of firearms, stay tuned. There's plenty more where this came from. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.